Last week I spoke about Avos Yisrael and really went into it in terms of what the pnimius of Avos Yisrael and why it's so important and so on, and so on. What what I thought I would speak about this week is, a lot of people would love to know what exactly is Judaism all about. Can Judaism be described, in a shiur in terms of what is the overall game plan of Judaism? Now we know that obviously the essential idea is the Taryag Mitzvahs. So let me just, before I begin, let me just say that this year should be a merit and a blessing for the health and success of the family of Regina Bas Yosef Reuven and Yeshaya ben Yisrael and Binyamin Wolf ben Tzvi Hersh and Baruch ben Binyamin Wolf. Also, it should be a tremendous aliyas neshama of Aaron Chaim Eliyahu ben Baruch Leib, and that they should all receive tremendous amount of merit for the thousands of people that I know that listen to these shurim. In any case, so a lot of people wonder, everybody has a fragmented view of Judaism. Some people look at doing chesed as the main idea of Judaism. Some people look, of course, at learning Torah as the essential idea of Judaism. And then there are people, of course, that look in general at Taryag Mitzvahs, 613 commandments. So there's no question that Judaism has many, many facets. Like a diamond has many facets. Judaism has many essential facets. But the truth is, it would be very worthwhile and valuable to have an overview, an understanding in general of what is the Ribbono Shel Olam really doing. What was in his mind, so to speak? What did he want? What is in his mind? What is his plan in an overall way? And then all these ideas is really just part of the game plan. So the question, of course, is, what part do they play? But really, what is the overall purpose or strategy of what the Ribbono Shel Olam really wants? So I thought that's really a very valuable idea. And when we begin to think about that, we realize, what really the Ribbono Shel Olam really wants. And Judaism is really the progression of this strategy. So it's very worthwhile to really, like I say, have an essential understanding of what Judaism really is all about. So when you think about it, it's very interesting what the Ribbono Shel Olam really wants. I would sum up, if I had to sum up, what Judaism is all about. What it really is this following statement. Judaism is really a process, a program of existential transformations. That's really what it is. What does it mean by existential transformation? Well, if you think about it, there is an existence, and that existence has certain characteristics, you see. Now, there are different qualitatives in terms of existence. We could certainly say the existence of an insect is vastly inferior to the existence of an animal, which itself is vastly inferior to the existence of man, you see. So we see that existence in and of itself has a certain level of characteristics, and there are differences in terms of superiority and inferiority. So what the Ribbono Shel Olam decided, which is really very interesting, is that he would create different existential states. In other words, just different types, levels, dimensions, or realities of existence. That's what he would do. And what he wants is he wants an entity, namely mankind, and especially the Jewish people, to change their existential levels. And that in and of itself would constitute the hatova, the goodness that he wants to give. And that's really what it is. It is a program of movement, shift, where one existential state, which means one type of existence, merges into another. But that other is vastly superior than the existence of the former, and so on. So you begin at a certain level, let's call it, level 1, and you start to go up and up, and finally you reach a level of existence, right, which is unbelievably superior to the number 1, you see. In fact, we can almost say that number 10, if that would be the top, would be an existence, right, that is so superior to level 1 that at the level of 1, if a person existed at existential state of 1, he could not even comprehend the type of existence of level 10. So what the Baruch Shem did, and the level of existence, as it changes in his movement, you see, is the real purpose of the whole program. But what he decided is this, and that's a very important idea, is that obviously mankind, and very importantly, specifically, or not solely, the Jewish people, they would be the entity that would move from one state to another, you see. And they would have some type of trigger or some type of device that would enable them to move from one existence to another. Because without that, how would they do it? So the Rebbe Hashem would provide them with some type of a trigger that if they initiated or if they involved themselves in that trigger, they would actually do the job of transforming their existence into a higher existence. And then if they continued, it would go higher and higher and so on. So that, if you look at it, is the overall game plan of what the Rebbe Hashem wants. That's the general, as they say, tochnit, the general purpose, you see, and the general logic of what he wants. That's all it is. It's nothing more complex than that, you see. And obviously it means that if there's a higher level of existence, then we could say that the higher level of existence that a man would aspire to is called perfection or shlemus, you see. So there would be a level of existence that could be designated as perfect. Sholem, shlemus means completion. And that in and of itself would be that which God wants to give the Jewish people. You see, it's really quite simple when you think about that. Now, the second thing that God decided was that a person who is the entity designated for this shift, right, has to do the job. In other words, the shift in existence to a higher level has to be initiated, right, by the person himself. The Baruch Shem will not do it. I mean, he will place him at, let's say, level 1. But in order to go to level 2 and then 3 and then 4, which we'll take a look at, he has to do it. He is responsible to move himself from one existential level to another. Now, I know I'm being very general, But in an overall sense, that's really what it's all about. What is interesting is this also, is that he doesn't have to do more than going from level 1 to level 2. To go from level 1 to level 10, right, is not the responsibility of the person. But he has to initiate the movement, and he has to go from level 1 to level 2. That's it. The one who will bring the person from level 2 all the way up to level 10 is the Rabbi Shalom, which is interesting. So the task doesn't become what's called onerous, burdensome or impossible, because he really has to do is to initiate with a certain, significance, let's say from level 1 to level 2 or maybe to level 3, but that's it. Then the Rabbi Shalom will do the rest. You see? It's almost like, if a guy wants to go up the Empire State Building, used to be the World Trade Center, but he has to initiate, and he cannot take the elevator, right? So the task is that you need to, and let's say the amount of floors is 110 floors. Well, he's going to try, so he'll go for the first 10 floors, right? And then after 10 floors, he's exhausted, right? So what does he do? So when he gets to the 10th floor, he still has what? He's still another 100 floors to go. All of a sudden he finds that there's an elevator that goes from floor 10 to floor 110. So all he has to do is get in the elevator and up he goes. It's the same idea. We only have to initiate, the first level or maybe second level of the change in existence. And then the Rabbi Shalom will do the rest. So all our effort really is applied for the first or second level of transformation. That's a very important concept. So it becomes much easier, as a result of that. So that's really what the game plan is. The game plan is to have an entity, a human, who is designated as the person which will be the subject of the transformations of existence, and he has to engage in some type of, activities or actions, right? And they will trigger the beginning of the movement, and then he will go higher. And the existential levels becomes the consequences of his work, you see? And in many ways, since he has to initiate, that means the reward or the consequences of what he receives is in the change of existence. That's all it is. But apparently that's all you need. So what the Rosh obviously has to do is create different levels of existence. And then he tells mankind, okay, you're on your way. You see? So the transformation of existence is what occurs as a result of the triggers that man does, you see. Now, what is it basically that man does that becomes a trigger for the ascent to different existential levels? And that is what's called the Taryag, you see. There are 613 commandments, and they are a trigger to move a person from one level to a second, or perhaps to a third, and then stop. After which, once he has reached, the end goal, so to speak, of the levels that he has to achieve on his own, then he does not have to engage in the trigger, which means he doesn't need the mitzvahs anymore, because he's already reached the goal that was assigned to him. You see? That's a very important idea, you see. In a general sense, we have a general sense of what is going on, you see. So, but this is the overall. And that is what Judaism is, like I said. It is a program of movement. And the program is to go from one existential level to a higher. And that itself is the manifestation of the incredible, incomprehensible, and infinite hatova goodness of what God wants to give. And our input is only the initial input. And then the Ribono Shel Olam will do the rest. You see. So that's a very important idea. That basically is what Judaism is, in a nutshell, and so on. And apparently that is all we need. We don't need anything else. All we have to do is change the level or the type of our existence. And that in and of itself is the greatest state of all, in whatever, however you can imagine it. It's the greatest pleasure, the greatest pleasure. It lacks nothing. It is devoid of any, absence of anything. There's no pain. There's no death. There's no disease. There's nothing negative. On the contrary, it has everything you need for a perfect existence. You see, nothing will be missing. So therefore, you don't need anything external. You see, the level of existence that you will have is a understanding of who you really are, your own being, the nature of reality, the nature of who you are. You will understand your own existence, how you exist, why you exist, and so on. And apparently in that is a tremendous amount of goodness. In a certain sense, if you ask yourself, what's the best thing, or what was the greatest time you ever had? And when you think about it, what I believe is the greatest time is the concept of well-being. Do you ever all of a sudden have a feeling that you just felt great? I think in English you can call it the zone. You were in the zone where you felt fabulous, you see? And you just, that's the concept of well-being. Think about that. You didn't need anything. You didn't need to be, a great dinner or some external device. You felt fabulous. That was the feeling you had. So that's an extraordinary feeling of well-being. That really, and that's really just, that is an existential state, right? Now imagine if you had that feeling of an extraordinary sense of well-being, right? And you had it eternally. Would you not think that this is it, this is perfect, I don't need anything else? Well, believe it or not, that's basically what happens. You will experience an extraordinary sense of well-being. You see? That, therefore, becomes the greatest level of existence. And that itself will be eternal. You see? And it has everything that is positive and nothing that is negative. You see? So this is the game plan. The only thing is that the Ribono Shel Olam wants you to initiate the first round, as they say, or maybe there's 2 rounds, right, of the mechanism that is required, which is the Taryag, you see. And if you do that, then you will have that experience. Now, the Ribono Shel Olam also has provided what's called ikuvim, or restrictions, because there are things that you have to do to get this existential transformation, right? And then there are things that you don't have to do, you have to avoid, because they create what's called blockages, you see. So what the Ribono Shel Olam did, because he wants mankind, certainly the Jews, to have this, he made it possible to remove the blockages in case a person has that, right? And that's the concept of not doing the Taryag, you see. So what he did is he created a concept called tshuva, you see. And if a person doesn't do tshuva, then he created another concept called yisurin, or suffering. So those 2 things, tshuva, which basically is charota, regret, of what he did, right? And the concept of suffering, if a person doesn't do tshuva, those things will remove the blockages or the fact that a person will not move forward. So that's removed. But the Taryag itself, what they do, is ultimately they will allow a person to move from one existence to a higher, until you reach a level of existence which is incomprehensible. And believe me, the Rebbe Shem can deliver whatever he wants. And in the end, he will deliver what you cannot even begin to imagine, just for initiating what he wants. And once that begins, then there's no more necessity for mitzvahs, because it's not, like I said, there's no necessity. You're already there, you see. So that basically is the game plan, which is what I've tried to show, you see. Now, if you think about it, there are certain stages which I'd like to go through, you see, that a person has to go through, and these are basically the concept of stages, you see, which have a lot of parallels. So I'd like to describe those stages. But before I do that, because they will parallel the different types of existence, you see. So basically, and I've said this before, but now I'm actually talking about the existential states. So I'd like to just mention briefly what they are, which, like I say, I've said before, but now I'd like to speak about them in more detail and so on. So the greatest existential state is called divinity, Elokus, divinity. It's where you actually experience the Ribono Shel Olam himself. You actually experience that. Now, we don't have no idea what that is, primarily because we don't know who God is. We have no idea what his level of existence is, what type of existence he has. We don't know what that is. But whatever it is, that level of Elokus is incomprehensible to us, but it clearly is the greatest state of all. It's complete shleimus, which is complete perfection. So we cannot be that. We cannot in any way replicate or duplicate that level of existence, okay? But what we can do is we can experience in some manner that level, you see, because in the end we are really emergents of God. We emerge from the Ribono Shel Olam, you see, because all level of existence, no matter what there is, emanates from God, you see. So if he wants, he can have us experience him at some level. So the level of experience or reality called Elokus, divinity, is the highest experience that we can achieve. And that is the level that ultimately God has in mind for us. Good. Now, that level is so lofty that it cannot in any way be duplicated, you see. But like I said, it can be experienced at a certain level. And like I said, that is the ultimate game plan that God wants, is for us to experience in some manner, which we will know in the future, something akin to what God experiences. I say akin because don't even think that it duplicates the level of existence of God. So let's call that level the level of Elokus, of divinity, you see. In fact, we see that there's a Yom every day of the week, and on Tuesday, it says David HaMelech says in Tehillim, B'nei Elokim Atem, you are like God. What is he saying? Because ultimately, we have the ability to achieve that level of Elokus. And we can actually be called, God, not literally, but in a figurative way, you see, that we will actually experience that. In any case, and that is why, by the way, that the neshama is called a chelik l'kai mimal. We are part of God in a way which we do not understand. And to experience God means to experience how we are part of Him, even though we remain separate from Him. You see, so that's really the greatest state, level of Elokus. Now, the second existential state is one below that, and that is a level where we experience the greatest type of feelings or whatever you want, existence and so on, where we do not experience Elokus, and that is called the level of Zulosai. In other words, the experience of God, or God, His existential level, is so great that nothing exists besides God. It's called Einod Milvado. So besides God, there is nothing really. And I want to give a whole shiur of who is God, and it's in two parts if you'd like to listen to it. In the level of God, there is nothing. He's the only thing that exists. That's how profound, that's how perfect that the nature of God is. So what God did is He created a vacuum, so to speak, where some aspect of Him allows something else to exist. You see, and that's what He did. And He created a certain operation called Tzimtzum, which is where He absented Himself, where He can allow something to exist, Zulosoi, besides Him. Now, we have no idea how He did that, or what it even means. But this is a concept called Zulosoi, which is a level of existence which is completely sublime. You see, it's not the level of Elokus, but it is a level where it's an astounding type of existence. And that is the level of neshama. So the neshama automatically, in and of itself, even without experiencing the concept of Elokus, which it will experience ultimately, but just by itself, it has this tremendous amount or incredible superiority of being. So that would be the second level of existence. And that the neshama has. Then there's a third level of existence, which I mentioned once. It's called ruchnius, spirituality, you see. And spirituality means what? Is that it is some type of existence, right, which is vastly superior than the spirituality that we know of, which is physical and so on. And as we will see, who are these type of beings that are spiritual? Those are basically angels. So they have a spiritual reality which is different than ours, but it's nowhere near as great as the neshama in terms of what it is in existence, you see. So that would be a third level of existence, the type of characteristics, the existence of spirituality, spiritual beings. So like I say, the neshama is much greater than the malachim or the angels, but they are spiritual, and as such they are vastly inferior to the physical reality. Then there's another reality which is called Geshem. It's called the physical world. It's not spiritual, but it is physical, you see. But it is physicality at an incredibly superior level. And that itself is a tremendous level of spirituality. And I'm going to talk about, who exists at what are the residents of each level of existence, and so on. Then there's a level where there are beings that are basically evil. Evil in the sense that they wish to do harm. You see, they are damaging agents. You see, so that is another level. So, to sum up, the highest level of existence is divinity, is Elokus. The second level of existence, right, is the neshama, which is called the zulosoi, which, other than being part of God, has an unbelievable type of existence. Then there's the spiritual, then there's the physical, and then there is the world of beings that are damaging, negative, right? These are the types of beings, and the ones who are part of that is called the Sitra Achra, the Satan, what's called also Malchi Chavolo, angels of destruction, and also Shadim, right? You see. So, therefore we have, how many do we have? Elokus is one, then we have Zulosai, then we have Ruchnius, we have Geshem, right, physicality, and then we have the world of the Sitra Achra, Satan, which is also called the world of the Zoyama, because that is a projection, in some sense, of the world of Sitra Achra, which means the other side. So you basically have 5 different types of existence. Now they also have levels of existence. For instance, in the 4th world, which is the level of Geshem, right, you have different types of physical beings, right? You have insects, right? You have animals, plants, and so on. So that is a level of existence. So even in the world of physicality, you have differences. So there are obviously many subdivisions in general, you see. So let's take a look. And that is that when you think about it, there are basically 5 different stages of a person in order to achieve that which he wants to achieve. And that is to earn a trigger where he can actually, transform the necessary existential transformations. Let's take a look. If you think about it, man is a developmental, program. There are basically what seems to be 5 programs, developmental programs, that an individual has, mankind has. Let's take a look. And these seem to be very, very, what is called significant. So the first thing, and this really is what happens, we have mankind, the first stage, and that is a stage of an embryo. Now an embryo is very interesting, because an embryo is basically, it's physical, but it's growing to be physical. It's really mostly spiritual. The neshama itself, right, whoever it is, basically, it has a physical thing, but it grows, right? It has to develop. So then what is it? It's mostly spiritual. It's mostly neshama. In fact, what is interesting is that in the neshama itself, right, we know that there's a malach that actually teaches the neshama while it's in the uterus. You see? So obviously it doesn't have much physicality because it's growing. But it does have, the neshama does have its awareness of what it is. And the malachim itself, right, has, each person has a neshama, or I should say, has its own teaching. So every neshama is taught by a malach in terms of what its mission ultimately really is. So when you think about it, the first stage is where the neshama is basically spiritual. It's neshama, you see, and it has very few physical substances. because it's developing. It is, it's taught, right, and develops as an embryo in the 9 months and so on, and then it becomes physical. But what it really mostly is spiritual. It's neshama. So that's the first thing. Now, what that really means is that the Rebbe wants it to know what it will be in the end. You see, it doesn't want the neshama to be dark, where it's, obtuse, really what's going to be. In the beginning, the neshama itself knows what it is, and that it's ultimately what it has to be is to develop itself. So it is spiritual, so it knows it's spiritual, right? And it knows ultimately that it will become that. Let's see. It's almost like if you want to know a test, so the first thing it will tell you is what is the test, which is what the Malach teaches, and how does it feel to be or to have the test. So that's the first thing, is that the neshama has to know the end first, before it becomes physical. Then the second thing is when the embryo is now completely, filled, or, completely made and so on, developed. So you have the second stage of existence of a neshama, or the development of a human. And that is comprised of several substages. You have the infanthood, when it's an infant, then toddlerhood, you see when it's a child, but much lower than a child. Let's say it's 2 years old, or 3 years old, or 4. Then it becomes a child, it becomes pre-adolescent, and it becomes adolescent. And that is the second stage. So the first stage of the neshama is when it's basically all spiritual. The second stage is when it's now physical, but it now has to develop. And there are two ideas of that second stage, which is what I said: infanthood, toddlerhood, childhood, pre-adolescent, and adolescent. What is the major task of these people? The major task is to find out who it is. That's what an adolescent's main task is. Who am I? What am I? You see? And also, what is my mission? It's called the identity, investigation. That's basically what that second stage is where the individual, the neshama, who is now physical, has to find out who it is, you see, to understand its mission, its identity. You see, and that is its major task, you see. And really it has, in a certain sense, two different paths. The first path, it has to know what is the truth, what is reality, you see. And the second thing, it has to know, what is there to avoid, and what is its path, what is the mission. So that really is all the job of the adolescent. It seeks to understand its identity. That's the second. Then the third stage of development of a human is the actual adulthood. That is the time of growth. And that is what the Rebbe wants. It wants it to grow in spirituality, what the truth is, you see, and to mature. And that takes place until, let's say, about 70 years old. So it takes place from, let's say, 18 or 20 till about 70. That is the main time of growth. That's the adulthood. So that is the third stage of what a neshama has to do, you see. Then there's old age, let's say from 70, 75, or whatever, right? And that is a stage where growth is much less, you see. It now begins to revert back to the old embryonic stage, physicality is diminished severely. Person is old, his physicality is diminished. It's hard to walk, person gets sick, becomes weaker, and so on, you see. But what it does have, the growth, the maturity of the 40 or 50 years of the adulthood. So, therefore, the person now has old age, and that is the age where it's much less physical, like I said, and it is able to use the wisdom, the maturity of what it has done for its entire adult life, and exercise, the opportunity of living a spiritual life without the difficulties of the drives, of the physical world or the adult world and so on. That's number 4. So remember, we have the embryonic stage, we have the adolescent stage, we have the adult stage, and we have the senior stage, the old age stage, and then we have number 5. And number 5 is basically the last idea, where the removal of physicality, and that is death, where the person dies, doesn't disappear, right? And he goes to Gan Eden, you see, and that is the return to spirituality, which was in the beginning, in the embryonic stage, where it was basically spiritual. So death is then obviously, at a time of, let's say, Gan Eden, and it is then spiritual, you see. So those are the 5 different developmental stages. And this is the different levels of development of what the Rabbi wants it to be, you see. Now, besides that, which I had mentioned, these 5 developmental stages, in order to achieve the ultimate mission, right, in order to therefore begin the existential transformation. Now that is later on. So we have, like I said, 5 stages, and then there begins the transformation of existence. And what that is called the Yemei Mashiach, when all the Jewish people will do the tikkun and have gone through all the developmental stages, which is what I mentioned, right? Then the first stage of existential change or transference is the Yemei Mashiach, you see. And the person, or I should say all Klal Yisrael, in fact, the entire world will now change, you see. And therefore what it does is it will remove the first existential state. Now I had mentioned something which is very important, and that is what God wanted, and this is Adam Harishon. Adam Harishon was pure physical, Geshem. He was spiritual, but he was physical, you see. And God wanted that to be the first level of an existential stage. But what he did is something which God did not want, really, except he had free will. So what Adam Harishon did, first man, he actually sinned. So what he did is he took the world of Geshem and he coexisted it together, he mingled it with the world of Zoyama. So the world of Zoyama, which never used to be part of the physical. So because he sinned, he actually existentially retransformed into a lower existence. So originally he was pure physicality without Zoyama. We don't even know what that is. There was no death, no disease. Adam was purely spiritual, but in a way physical, even though we don't understand what that means, without any kind of intermingling with the Satan, you see. And all of a sudden, because of the sin, Adam Harishon became, right, physical mixed with a pervasion, right, of the Zoyama, of the Satan. So now man moved down. He became existentially worse. So he had to start from that. And so when we think about that, instead of starting at the existential level of physicality, it started at a much lower level, where the physical world now became intermingled with the Zoyama, the Sitra Achra, the Satan, you see, Tumma, Kripa, whatever you want to call it, and so on, you see. So now mankind had to work from a much lower existential level and move up, you see. And that's not what the Bernstam wanted. So that's what happened with Adam. Adam Arishan, without, going through the elaborate ideas, right, he lowered the world to, a much lower existential level of Geshem together with the Zoyama of the Satan. So therefore man now dies. There's a tremendous amount of evil, negativity, right? Death, disease, and so on. So it was a very different world. So what happened is therefore, for 6,000 years, the main idea, or less, whatever, the main idea was that he would have to remove the world, the existential level, right, from a world which is Geshem, physicality, and Zoyama. He would have to remove the Zoyama and only have a level of existence with Geshem, but without Zoyama. No Satan, no Tumma, and so on. And that would be incredible, you see. And that would be stage number 6. So after the person went through the developmental stages, he now began to experience the existential transformations. And the first one that I said, what was it? It was the first existential level, transformation, I should say, is Yemos HaMashiach, is the Messianic era. And that's what began. So I've described the developmental level of the stages of man, which is we now have. Now what is interesting also is that the history of the world mirrors that concept of the developmental stages of man. So we took a look at what the stages of man are in terms of the individual, and we saw that there are 5. Now when we take a look at the history of the world, we have the same idea, and they parallel the developmental stages of man. The first stage is where the Baruch wants to show a person, when it is purely neshama, what it's like, what it can be. So he had Adam Harishan start off as pure Geshem, without any evil whatsoever. He was basically physical, but it wasn't our kind of physicality. It was a physical world, right, that was without Zoyama. And we don't even know what that means. We have no idea what it is to have no Yetzer Hara. And his job was, to what extent will he seek the truth? And his job wasn't to fight evil. There was no real evil, you see. His job was, to what extent, how rapid would it be that he would fight to know the truth? So he was basically almost all spiritual, even though he was physical, but he was the highest level of physicality, right? And that's how he would start, as basically a neshama. But what happened, like I said, is obviously he fell, and he intermingled with the Satan and the world of the Tumma, of what's called the Kripa, right? The Zoyama. He merged with that world, you see. So, therefore, he now goes through the necessity of getting rid of the world of the Zoyama. You see. So the first world is Adam Rishon before the sin. Then you had, the second stage is Adam Rishon after the sin for the first 2,000 years. And that is the equivalent of adolescence, where they have to learn significantly what the truth is, to discover, right? To discover and be enlightened what the true path is, you see, and how to worship God. So the world of adolescence, stage of adolescence, is equivalent to the 2,000 years from Adam all the way to Avram. Then you have the stage of adulthood, which is a stage of growth. And what that is that the world now became, right, the concept of from 2,000 years until all the way 6,000 or almost 6,000. That's the growth. That's equivalent to the world of avodah, adulthood. You see, and that is the era of the Jewish people, from Avram Avinu, the Ovos, the Shvatim, Mitzrayim, and the four kingdoms. Those are all the necessities of the Jewish people growing, maturing, right, and actually doing the avodah, the service, the mitzvahs, and so on. So that is the equivalent, right, of that is the equivalent of the adulthood itself. Then you have the next stage, right, which is old age, which is basically a return to spirituality and a diminishment of physicality. That's the change, and that is basically the Mashiach, you see, where the history of the world after the Tikkun is the Messianic era, and that's where you have all the wisdom and the spirituality of the Mashiach itself, you see. And then you have the last stage, which is a stage of death, right, in terms of the development. You have the concept of what's called Zikuch. That is the actual process of existential transformations, you see, that has to occur. So again, you have 5 levels of historical movement. You have the Chet of Adam Harishon before the sin. Then the second thing is the 2,000 years from Adam Harishon to Avram Avinu. And then you have Avram Avinu, the Jewish people, and the whole movement toward the Tikkun itself. Then you have the Messianic stage. And then you have what's called the Zikuch, the purification. And that is the real beginning of an existential transformation. So there you have it. Those are the 5, stages of history, which are basically, in many ways, the equivalent of the developmental stage of an individual person, you see? Now, we know what the existential levels are, where man begins the process, and then God takes him the rest of the way, right? We have initially, there's Geshem and Zoyamot together, the mingling. Then we have the world is transformed into Geshem, and that's really all we have to do, right, which is physicality. And that's like Adam Rishon before the sin, right? And that's the Messianic process. Then the third Messianic, spiritual or existential level is Ruchni, the angels. Then we have the Zulosoi, right, which is above the whole concept of angels. And then Elokus. And Elokus, of course, happens in Olam Habo. Now, we know the residents or the denizen, right, of each existential level, and they cannot move. They're fixed at that existential state, you see. So the denizens or the residents of the lowest existential state, of the Geshem Zoemo, is, of course, the Sitra Achro, the Satan himself. You have the Malchi Chavolo, the angels of destruction. You have Shadim, which are sort of like part man, part spiritual. Then you have the concept of the Klippas, the 4 Klippas, which I once explained in the Shiur on Pesach, right? The Tumah. That's all the world that we inhabit. They remain fixed. Shadim, the Gesh, the Satan, and the Malchi Chavolo, They don't move. They remain at that existential level. We are the ones who move. Then you have the world existential level of the Geshem, which is, physicality without Geshem and Zoyamo, right? And that's basically, which is really two subphases. You have the Geshem with mingling of the Zoyamo, and then you have the Geshem pure. But that is the biosphere. It has man, it has plants, it has animals, and so on. They don't move. Animals cannot in any way move forward at a different existential level. They reside there and they die there, and that's it. You see? And by the way, that's also called Asiya. The world of Geshem is called the world of Asiya. You see, that's the lowest world. What's interesting is part of that world of Geshem, since it doesn't have Zoyama, is also called, there is a spiritual aspect of the physical world. You see? So there is, interestingly enough, an aspect of spirituality of the world of Asiya. One of them is you could see neshamas, because there's still an aspect of physicality. By the way, that's the concept of ghosts. Ghosts and other denizens of that world, which is sort of like partial physical and partial spiritual. But it's a lower level of spirituality, which is in the world of Asiya. Then you have what's called the next world is the world of the angels, which is the world of Ruchni. An angel cannot grow. It is fixed. Its existential state is fixed at that world. And that world really is two. It's called Yetzirah, Olam Yetzirah, right? The world of formation, and Bria, the world of creation. These are the angels that inhabit the world of Bria and Yetzirah, and these are the world of the angels. And they're also fixed. They cannot move beyond an existential state of these two worlds. Then you have a higher existential plane called Atzilus, and that is the world of the Neshama, Zulosoi. But it's not the ultimate existential state that the Neshama can be. What comes after that, now all these ones I just mentioned, which is the four levels, Atzilus, Bria, Yetzirah, and Asiya, that is called Olam Hazeh. Then there's what's called Olam Haba. Now what Olam Haba is, it's not Olam Hazeh, obviously. Olam Haba means the future world. But it is a world whose existential level is Elokus. It's divine. And that ultimately is what the Neshama becomes a resident of. Now, that world, the world of Olam Haba, you see, is not obviously Olam Hazeh, but it is a world of incomprehensible existential reality. We have no idea what it is, as the Gemara says. We have never seen anything like that. Ein lo yiroso, mashet sofnet tzadikim, right? The eye has never beheld the reality of Olam Haba, which is also called in Kabbalah Adam Kadmon, which is primordial man. That is a level of Elokus, divinity, and it is the highest level of the Neshama. Therefore, what we see is very interesting. Each world existential plane, right, has its own residence, or its own denizens, so to speak. They cannot move. They're fixed. The only entity that can move continuously, right, is the Neshama. And that's why the Neshama is an unusual being. Everything is fixed at its existential level, right, which is what I mentioned, the different levels, and so on. But the Neshama is a composite. It is the Neshama which can become one with the divine, Elokus, but it's also merged with a Geshem. It's also merged with a physical reality. And not only that, it's merged with a mingling of the physical reality, which is the world of the Zoyama, the Sitra Achra, the Satan, you see. And the Neshama is really a composite of two things. It is a Neshama, which can merge with God in that sense, the highest of all existential levels. And it's also a composite together with physicality. And what's even worse is that the physicality, right, is together with the Zoyama, you see. So we begin to see that there are basically always 5 things involved, 5 stages of man's development. That's his journey, right? Then it has 5 stages of history to do the tikkun, right? Then we have 5 levels of existential realities, right? The different denizens or residents of these 5 realities. And I also told you what the names are Kabbalistically of these 5 different changes or 5 different levels of reality. You see, and what I will tell you is the time, right? So the level of Geshem together with Zoyama, right, till that ends, is basically less than 6,000 years. Hopefully it will end by 2030, which I've mentioned many times. That will be the end. 6,000 years is the maximum time allotted for a world dominated by physicality together with Zoyama. Then as part of that 6,000 years, you can have the Yemei HaMashiach, the Messianic world, right? The Messianic, limit, time, and so on, So the Yemei HaMashiach really is equivalent to Adam Rishon before the sin. We go back to what it was, and in that time, in the Messianic era, right, the Zoyama is completely removed, and it's purely a world of Geshem. And we have no idea what that means. We did have a time when it was almost that, and that is when the Jews got out of Egypt, I had mentioned. It says, Nifsika Zoyama Shel Nochosh. What that means is that the Jewish people had the existence of the Satan, the world of the Zoyama, but interestingly enough, the world of the Zoyama existed, but it was not mingled together with the Geshem. The world of the Zoyama had no influence on the world of the Geshem, and we don't even know what that means. They were not human the way we are, because the Zoyama, even though it existed, could not influence the Geshem. The Jews had evicted or extracted the Zoyama from having any kind of influence over their bodies. That was the only time we had ever achieved. And now that we are in the middle of the level of the spheres, we count 49 days. Every day is a removal of one aspect of the Zoyama until the 50th day, when the Zoyama is evicted. And had they not done the Chet Egel, then that world of the Zoyama would have been evicted, extracted from the world of Geshem, and then the Jewish people would be actually in a state of not having to do the Taryag. In other words, they would have had the concept of the Torah at the level of Malachim, where they would not have to do it. You see, it would be only Zohar and not Shomor. 2 different ideas. Zohar, remember, is a world of knowing the Hasog of the Torah. And when it says Shoma, to guard the Torah, that's the level where you have to do the Torah to remove the Zoyama, you see. 2 distinct stages. And unfortunately, the Chet HaEgel is what restored the intermingling of the Zoyama together with the world of Geshem. But in any case, this is what we see, you see. And the time limit, like I say, is Yemei HaMashiach is like Adam Rishon before the sin, completely as if Adam Rishon before the sin did not sin. Tikkun would be complete, and in the year 6,000, that would be the beginning of the existential transformation itself. You see, that means the human, the neshama, its physical body would become ruchnius. And that's the equivalent from until 6,000, like I said, is to remove the world of the Zoyama and to remove the world of Geshem. From 6 to 7,000 years, right, that is the world of Yitzira, which is Ruchnius, and the neshama then removes the Geshem, or diminishes it severely, and from 7 to 8, it turns into Bria, you see, where the neshama now has the physical concept, which is severely diminished, and that's the world of Ruchni, you see. And then we have from 8 to 9,000 years, and that the neshama becomes the existential state of the world of Atzilus, you see, which is the greatest form of existential state of the neshama in this world. And then from the year 9,000 until eternally, the world turns, the extension of turns into what is called Olim Haba, or what's called Adam Kadmon, you see, and that begins an existential state that we have no comprehension of what it is. And that completes the whole program, the game plan of what God wants. And like I said, what the Baruch Shem wants, he wants a program where if you do certain things initially, it will change the existence of reality. And that's what a human being experiences, to the extent where he now becomes a perfect state, shlemus, perfection, you see, and he now enjoys the greatest existential state that is possible. Now what's interesting, it's not that it happens, there's an existential transformation of the future world that happens once, and that's it. No. The future world itself is eternal. That means, it says, that a tzaddik doesn't have any menucha. He has no rest in Olam Haba. What does that mean? Not that he does mitzvahs, but that the program of existential transformation continues upwardly forever. Now, it's hard for us to imagine, how could there be an infinite amount of existential transformations? But that's exactly what happens. In Olam Haba, it's not that there's one existential transformation into an entirely different world or reality, but that reality of existential transformations itself continues eternally. We cannot even comprehend the existential transformation of Olam Haba. How can we possibly understand what a transformation of existence continuing infinitely? That means every second there's a greater transformation. The next second, a greater transformation. You see? That means existence transforms again continuously, you see. And we have no comprehension of what that means. It's an eternal existential transformation. And this is ultimately what happens in Olam Haba, which is a very, very important idea. Okay, so we have a lot of things which I've gone through. They're all parallel to each other. They all figure, right? And how they're all interconnected, you see. And what's interesting is in Bereshis, the beginning, it says, Behi Borom, in God's creating, where it says God created, heaven and earth and so on. I think it's the second pair. And it says, Behi Borom, right? Behi Borom, and he's creating them. And if you look, it really consists of two words. Behi, with 5, Borom, he created them. You could divide the word. And I've just mentioned many things, right? I've mentioned the stages of man that parallel the history of man, the tikkun process, right? The history of the 5 different existential states, the history, or rather the residents or the denizens of those existential states, you see. And I've also talked about the time period of these existential states. So what I hope is that I've actually given the actual game plan of Judaism. And one thing I can say is that we are very close. And just to explain that, a very important idea to understand that in the end of time, what is the last thing that happens before the Mashiach comes? Is what God does is He wants to demonstrate what does the greatest amount of intermingling between the Satan, the Zoyama, and Geshem. We have now hit it. And the reason for that, why it has to be so, and that's why we are looking at such an incredible amount of unbelievable evil, corruption, depravity, decay. It's just incredible what's going on, is that we are witnessing what does it look like when mankind sees the ultimate mingling between the Zoyama world and the world of Geshem. So we will be able to appreciate, since we are now looking at the lowest form, or I should say the greatest mingling of the Satan, right, together with the physical reality, the world of the Zoyama and the world of Geshem. You don't go lower than this, you see. So we're looking at it. So as a result of that, we will be able to contrast, to go from this world, right, to the movement of the Mashiach, the world of Yemosha Mashiach. That itself will be absolutely astounding. So he wants to give us an appreciation of what we're about to encounter. What does it look? What's the Messianic era? And I guarantee you, we have no concept even what the Messianic era will look like. It's unbelievable level of existence, you see? And we can appreciate that by looking at the lowest level of the world of the Zoyama, right? The world of the Zoyama together with Geshem. Right, we are looking at the lowest world possible, you see. And that's why. And the second thing is that we will be able to appreciate the might and power of God. That when He changes the world existentially, we will see He's not just changing the world which is not bad to something which is better. He will change the world from something which is utterly evil, utterly corrupt, depraved, you see, to a world that is utterly spiritual. So we will then begin to realize who God is, what His might is, you see, what His power is, you see. And that's why what we are about to encounter isn't a normal redemption. It is going to be spectacular, greater than the exodus of Egypt. And that was spectacular. And we realize that the 10 plagues is spectacular. So we're going to be able to see spectacular miracles that's going to happen in this redemption. Okay. Any questions?
Yes.
Sure.
Okay, so we have the 5 stages of human existence. Do they correlate to the 5 levels of our neshama?
Actually, yes, they do. Yes, I left that out, but you're right. In fact, that's something I want to talk about next week or the week after, whatever, right? Yes, you're right. Those 5 levels correspond, right, to the 5 levels of existence. In fact, that's what enables us to get there, to influence, to have a hold or an influence on the different existential levels, right, which I'm going to elaborate hopefully next week. But you are 100% correct. Good observation.
So, at each level of our existence, when from embryo to childhood, adult, adolescence, all those as we go up to death, do we have a different tikkun at each stage?
Yes. Each stage wants to necessitate a mission, right? Like I said, first is the stage of spirituality. First know what the end game is. Then there's the beginning of discovery, right? And then there's the mission itself, the growth. Then there's the outlook at the end to enjoy it should be that way anyway, the wisdom that you've accumulated through the stage of adulthood. And then, of course, there's the actual stage where you leave the Zoyama, and that is death. And that's basically Gan Eden. It's really what it is. And then after all 5, then there's the beginning of the transformation, which is the Messianic era. That is the beginning, the start. Right?
So you were saying that when we're in the embryo, the Malach teaches us our tikkun. But I
Right.
love that we're learning the Torah.
Well, Torah is everything. See, what the Malachim wants to show you as a neshama, because you don't really have a body, you're just developing it, right? What the Malach wants to show you as a neshama is your mission. But what's interesting, so you could say, well, why doesn't he just teach you the mission, right? Why does he have to teach you the whole Taryag? Remember, the Taryag is everything. And the answer is because the whole Taryag really is one concept, which is Elokus, divinity. And the only way you can understand your mission is within the circumstances, right, of the whole Torah. See, we look at Torah as fragments, but really it's all connected. So if you want to understand your mission, you have to understand it within the context of the whole Taryag. That's why the Malach teaches the Neshama the whole Taryag, because it's only within that it understands its specific mission.
So once the Neshama fully understands its mission in this world, that's when it comes out?
Well, that's what it learns for 9 months before it comes out, right?
So
and then we know that when the child comes out, the Malach presses under its nose, and you forget the experience of being taught the Malach. And that Malach probably, by the way, is your Malach, your guardian angel. Every person has his own guardian angel, as they call it. And that Malach is your defender, your teacher, and so on. He argues for you in the Bezdin. You know, it's like every nation has a Malach, right? A Sar. Every Jew has a Malach, you see.
Is there like a specific, how does Hashem choose which Malach to give you?
That's unknown. That is unknown.
Of your neshama?
Right. That's probably what happens. That Malach isn't just in a separate entity. That's an outgrowth of your neshama. You see. Because the secret of the neshama, by the way, is that the existence itself emanates from your neshama. See, we don't do that. We don't see ourselves. We see ourselves as separate from the world, you see. But really, the world is part of us. Everything is a mystical oneness. Just like last week I talked about the organism, that we're really one organism, you see. That's why the mitzvahs are directed bein Adam l'mokum, between us and God, because we're part of God. And that's why there's mitzvahs bein Adam l'chaveroi, because we're one organism. You see, that's why there are 2 sections of mitzvahs, because we are, like I said, we are attached to God, chelik l'kaymimal, we are part of God, so we have mitzvahs to that part. He's part of us, or I should say we're part of him, and we're one organism, so that's why we have mitzvahs bein Adam l'chaveroi, how we're supposed to act toward our different parts. You see?
So I want to ask you, you were talking about how in one of the levels...
Talking about what?
In one of the levels of reality, you said that there's ghosts.
Yes.
How do we, at the level of Asiya, experience, like, ghosts? How do we get to that other reality?
Well, there are ways. See, the world of Asiya, in certain ways, is a mixture. It's a world of Zoyama, that's number one. It's a world not only of Zoyama, but it's a world of Geshem. But it's also a world of Ruchni, which is interesting. It's like a kolboy, where everything is in it, you see. In fact, the world of Asiya has hecholos, chambers. It has levels. There's what's called 7 Rekiim, 7 heavens. You see, some of them are spiritual, But it's not the same spirituality as Yetzirah and Bria. Those are angelic. But these are spirituality, which means it's the highest or the purest level of Geshem, you see. And that's why we can see a ghost. I mean, you see that the stories of ghosts in the Talmud. I mean, Rabbi Akiva saw a neshama. He could see the actual neshama in its form of what it has, a uniform of physicality, you see. So he was able to talk to it. And there's a whole story. That's the origin of Kaddish and so on. But so therefore, a ghost is really a merger. It is a spiritual being that is part of some type of attachment to the physical world. That's what a dibuk is. You know, a dibuk is an neshama that still can connect to the world of Asiyah, the world of Geshem, because it has not, removed, shedded its attachment to the world of Geshem. But then it's not fully Geshem, you see? So those are the concepts of ghosts, of dibuks, and so on. Those are entities that are part and part. You see?
What stage do we have to be at to access that?
Well, that's a good question. In order to access this type, there are two ways to do it. There's what's called the operational mechanisms, which are actually physical. They are directed by shemus, names of God, and names of malachim. In fact, there's a whole sefer written on how to do it, how you could see neshamas, which are devoid of a body, yet they're connected, whether they be dibuks or they be neshamas and so on. But there are ways, and they're actually svarim about how to do it, how to meditate. A lot of it is predicated on meditation of divine names, of names of malachim. It's all part of the world of kishuf and part of the world of physicality and so on. And then the second way is Ruach HaKodesh, which doesn't need a mechanism. It's based purely on your elevated state of holiness, that you're actually able to see the spiritual aspect of the physical world. There are tzaddikim that can see this. One of them is called Eliyahu, right? There are tzaddikim that can see Eliyahu Hanavi. There are stories about this. There was once a story with somebody, I forgot who the name of the tzaddik was, where she said to her father, I think it was Sukkot, she said, who's the guy in the white beard sitting next to you in the sukkah? So he looked at it and said, be quiet, right? Unfortunately, she probably wasn't able to sustain that. I think she died that year. Small kid. But the main idea is that there are tzaddikim that can see. Why? Because these neshamas are still connected to the physical world. Eliyahu Hanavi is a classic, but he's an angel that is connected, in some sense, to the physical world. Most angels are not. They are connected only to the Olam Yetzirah and Bria. But there are malachim, like Eliyahu, who are connected to the Olam of Asiyah. But they are connected to the Ruchnius, the spirituality of Asiyah, you see? And that is why, if you're holy enough, you can see them just by your tzidkis. But obviously it's a very high level. So that's a second way of accessing these type of entities in the physical world, you see.
How do you explain,
I can't hear you, what?
How do you explain neshamas that come to you in dreams to give you messages?
That come what?
They come in dreams to give you messages.
Because they also are connected to the physical world, you see. So therefore they can actually come. But they have to have a schus. I mean, it's not, they can't just do whatever they want. But many times a relative, a lot of stories about this, where a relative will come to a person in a dream and warn them, or come to them before they die and say, you're going to join me. These people are able to, because these neshamas that come still have a connection, a kesher, to the physical world. If they didn't, they would not really be able to appear, You see.
So does that mean they're not in Gan Eden yet?
Does that mean what?
That they didn't reach Gan Eden?
Well, yes, it would probably mean that. Although what's probably true is that a Malach, since Gan Eden is really, you see, Gan Eden is an interesting place. There's Gan Eden, which is part of a spiritual world, but then there's Gan Eden HaTachton, right? So it's Gan Eden, but it's still part of the physical world. So it depends where you wind up. You know, you could wind up in Gan Eden, which is purely spiritual, but it's still the world of Gan Eden. You see, it's not the real Olam Yetzirah. Well, it is basically Olam Yetzirah, but it's not the world which is pure Ruchnius. You see, and then there's Gan Eden, which has a tremendous connection with the physical world. It's a very complicated, situation.
So
this is not a simple world. What was that?
If you're in the Gan Eden of Tachton, the bottom one, does that mean that you still have to be reincarnated to finish your tikkun?
It could mean, right, yes. It could mean that you can't go to the Gan Eden or Elyon, because there's still aspects of tikkun that you have to complete, but on a spiritual level. You see.
So when a person who passes away comes to talk to their...
I can't hear you. What was that?
Speaker.
When a person who dies who comes to speak to their family in a dream, it's
yes.
Because they're still connected to the world?
Because it comes what?
They're still connected to the world?
She's saying, let's say a family member comes in a dream, just to contact you. Not to tell you that you're dying or anything, just to contact you. Does that mean that they're still connected to this world?
Yes, probably. They are connected to this world. Because if they were completely free...
How many years could they be connected to this
world? That all depends on their level of tzidkis, or how removed they were from physicality. But there are neshamas that are completely detached, and they don't come back. You see, they don't come back. But there are many neshamas that have an attachment to the Olam Asiyah, because like I said, there's an aspect of Asiyah, right, the lowest world almost, right, that is spiritual. And that's the concept of many heavens, many chambers, and so on.
So technically, you don't want your dead relatives to come visit you because you want them to go to the Elyon.
Correct.
Well, in a certain sense, you're right.
That they pass, that they come to talk to you and give you messages that apply to what's going on in the world right now.
Yeah, so then, right, then they are connected. Then they are connected to Olam Asiyah, right?
So now my question
so,
is,
what?
Could they be reincarnated at the same time as the soul is connecting to you from the previous lifetime?
Well, they can't be reincarnated. There's no Tchias HaMesim yet.
No, reincarnated meaning Gilgul.
A Gilgul come back, she means.
Can they be a Gilgul? And
yes.
Time,
yeah, because there's different types of what's called Gilgulim. There are neshamas that come back, right, because they didn't do their job or finish their job or whatever, right? And then there are different parts of the neshama that come back, you see. But there are also neshamas that come back to assist, other neshamas, because the other neshama can't make it on its own. So that's called ibur. It's piggyback, where the neshama will, sort of like go on top of, or however it connects, with a neshama in a neshama, and therefore in that body you'll have two neshamas, and all of a sudden that individual will have a much greater consciousness. It'll have some of the content or the drive, you see, of the Ibur neshama, you see, and that is to help the neshama. It will assist, you see. A great deal of your consciousness depends if you have an Ibur neshama. An Ibur neshama means a neshama, an assistive neshama, and you will actually experience the consciousness of that ibur, of that, it's almost like what do you call it, a birth, that it's appendaged, you see. Yeah, I mean, the world of Gilgulim is a very complex world, and that is the essential mission. The Rebbe Hashem is always watching out. How do I get this individual neshama to Olam Haba? That's the game plan. But there are many side roads to get there, you see. So if the Rebbe Hashem is seeing that a neshama is not going to make it on its own, it needs a greater drive, a greater, level of consciousness and awareness, and so on, then he will assign a neshama to help out. And usually that involves some type of merit, some type of schus, So it's really a very complicated affair. But in the end, it all works out. That's the critical thing to know. You see, everybody will get to Olam Haba with an incomprehensible existential state. And that's what the game plan is.
So then, for a soul, a husband and wife is technically one neshama.
Yes.
So do they share the same tikkun?
Generally speaking, yes. That's why it's really a team effort. Because the tikkun that they're assigned to directly connected to the Shurish Neshama. The tikkun that we must do, or our mission, isn't arbitrary. It is direct. It is purposeful. And it is connected to the Shurish Neshama, the type of soul that we have. The problem is we don't know what the assignment is determined by. Nobody knows. Only God knows the internals of a neshama, and therefore what tikkun it needs in what's called the tikkun hakloli, in the overall or the general tikkun, which is what everybody is striving. All we know is that everybody has an assignment, everybody, based on the root neshama, but we don't know why this assignment is designated for that neshama. That is unknown. You see. And God keeps all of this in his mind. You see.
So we technically share a guardian angel with our husband?
What was that?
You share a guardian angel with your spouse?
Yes. There would be a guardian angel over each person of the team and the team in general. And that malach is directly connected to your tikkun. You see. There's nothing that's arbitrary. Everything has a logic behind it, of which we will find out in the Messianic era. And that's a lot of information, Okay. I hope everybody enjoyed this shiur and gained a lot of valuable information.